All right, Judge Schimel, they tell me we are ready and rolling, so thank you for making time for us.
Thank you, Charles. It's good to see you.
Let's start with something that voters are once again hearing about, these campaign commercials about how thousands of sexual assault kits went untested or were not tested fast enough while you were Attorney General. Is that a fair argument?
It isn't, Charles. This is disturbing and shameful, frankly, that they keep making this fake argument. For 25 years before I became Attorney General, these sexual assault kits accumulated in police department storage rooms and hospital storage rooms. When I came to the Department of Justice, having been a prosecutor on the front lines for 25 years, particularly over 10 years doing sensitive crimes, I knew that there was value to getting those kits tested, and we set out to doing it. There were people who told me, this is dangerous, Brad, because if you touch a problem you didn't cause, somebody might try to link you to it. So I knew the danger, but I knew the value. We had to get these kits tested. We set out to do it, and we did it in only a few years to get 25 years worth of a problem solved.
So let's go backwards a little bit. Why were these like 6,000 just sitting on shelves prior to your arrival at DOJ?
There were a lot of different reasons. Sometimes law enforcement viewed the case as unnecessary to test the kit because the offender confessed. So they collected the sexual assault kit from the survivor. You've got that evidence, but then you go talk to the offender and they admit we had sex, but it was not consensual. Excuse me, the argument is about consent. So it doesn't make any sense to test the kit under those circumstances. What they were missing is that many sex offenders offend against more than one victim. They do it again and again, especially if they've gotten away with it. So if you test that kit, even though in that case you may not need the DNA evidence, you get that on the data bank and you may solve other cases. That's the value testing these brings to the process. That's why we knew we need to get these tested.
In the ad, your opponent, Judge Susan Crawford, is running the ad that says, quote, he let 6,000 rape kits sit untested for 2 years while survivors waited for justice. Doesn't the timeline of events suggest that claim is accurate?
No, nobody let anything sit. We got to DOJ and we didn't have any resources to test these kits. I couldn't just take them and drop them off at the crime lab. So we had to get the resources. So we applied for and got grant money from national organizations who shared this interest in getting these kits tested. They provided us grant money, and we did something that has not been really done before. We did this on a statewide level. Cities like the city of Detroit took it on as a city level. We did it as a whole state of Wisconsin. So we got the grant money. The grant money required certain things in the process, including we had to first get an inventory, find out how many kits are out there. No one had kept track. So we had to go to every law enforcement agency and every hospital that did sexual assault exams and find out what they had, get their list, get the inventory. Then we had to go through and find the survivors and get permission from them to use their evidence, because this is evidence collected from their actual body. So we went out and got their consent to conduct the testing. We ended up having about 4,200 kits that needed to be tested. That process I described, it takes time. So we had to do that first. As soon as we had information in to enable us to start testing, we did. And we developed contracts with outside labs that performed the testing on these kits, so I didn't burden our crime lab.
So let's talk about the timeline so that people can have a better understanding. In September of 2015, you get the $4 million. By February of 2017, your own office is saying they had only looked at or cleared 9 cases.
So we got the money. The next step we had to take was to get the inventory. So we hired on people to go get that inventory from all the law enforcement agencies. The next step then was to find all those survivors, because we didn't know who they were until we got the inventory from all the police agencies and hospitals. Once we had that, we could then go out, find them, and interview them. That is a time-consuming process. There's no way around it, but it's the right way to do it. It's victim-centered. You know, I came into this process not alone, but with partners in this. Justice Jill Karofsky was the head of the Office of Crime Victim Services. She is my lead partner in this. Audrey Skorowski, the director of state courts now, she was the other partner in this. We all developed this process together. It was the right way to do it, and we got it done right. And more importantly, this will not happen again because of the process we put in place.
Let me just ask one more follow-up on that. So when the numbers are presented to you in 2017, after now having that money and then seeing where you were, the pace does pick up in those next 2 years. Why did it pick up? What looked different? And was it a concern of yours that it wasn't moving fast enough?
When the pace picked up, that was a result of having finished those preliminary steps. We had the inventory done, we had tracked down the survivors and talked to them. So then we were able to move, and we had our contracts with private labs to enable us to go forward. So once we had those preliminary steps done, yes, then it started moving very quickly, exactly as we would have predicted.
And you were able to get through 4,100 cases.
Yeah, I think it was close to 4,200, yes.
Out of the 6,000. So what did that result in terms of by testing those kits?
There were cases then that we discovered evidence that we were able to bring against offenders to get convictions in sexual assaults that hadn't been previously charged.
Let's talk about why you're running
Yeah.
for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. I think on your webpage it says Brad Schimel will take back the Wisconsin Supreme Court and end the madness. What madness needs to end?
The madness on this court is we've had people run for office promising how they're going to rule on cases, and then they've gone on the court and they've delivered on those promises. There's no objectivity there. I characterize this to average voters all the time like going to a Brewer game and you buy your first $17 beer, but the umpire comes out wearing a Cardinals jersey. You're not sticking around for the end of this game. You're not buying another beer because you know how this is going to end. Now, a Cardinals fan might think that's great because they're in a pennant race, and we're going to get a win tonight. But baseball's now dead. Take this over to the court. With baseball, you can find another sport to enjoy. If the courts are wearing jerseys for a team, then there's no place else to go. Our justice system is broken. There's no way to replace that in our republic. Therefore, we have to stop this. Judges have to return to being objective, not being influenced by the nature of the party in front of them, but influenced by the law and the Constitution.
Is there a specific example?
You heard Justice Protasevich on the campaign trail say over and over again that the maps are rigged, referring to the legislative districting maps. She then went on the court, and in record time, the lawsuit was filed the day after she was sworn in, and before Christmas Eve, the Friday before Christmas Eve, that court issued a decision striking down the state's legislative maps. They bypassed the trial courts. They did it at record speed to carry out the promises that were made.
But wouldn't you agree that these days, in this hyper-partisan environment we live in, that people see the court as red robes and blue robes? And so they're looking at the red robes just as you are looking at the blue robes.
They're black robes. They're not red or blue robes. Every juror we have come into the courtroom to serve on a jury trial, we go through lengthy questions with them, walking through their history. Everybody has political baggage. Everyone has opinions and personal experiences. The question for juries, I don't have one of those little men in black pens that I click and I can erase the jury's memories. I instead have to get their assurance that they will set aside their personal opinions, their personal judgments, and decide this case objectively. And we ask them to probe their own conscience seriously and decide, are you able to set aside your personal experiences? We expect that from jurors, and they deliver on that every single week in our courtrooms. Judges should do no less than be able to set those aside. And if you can't, you don't deserve to wear the robe.
All right, let me ask you about expectations, because both you and Judge Crawford will be making the argument that you are going to be impartial on the bench. But do you believe in these hyper-partisan times that people, the voters, who either back you or her, will really want you to be on their side of the issue, and what that expectation might mean on how you vote with other conservatives or on Republican issues? My point is, the expectation is that you are going to vote a certain way because they see you as a conservative or Republican, and just the opposite for her.
This goes back to that baseball analogy. You may like that the umpire tonight is rooting for your team, but you're not going to like that long term. And that is the message that Wisconsin voters, I hope, will accept in all this, that you don't want judges who are deciding a case based on their personal opinions because today they might agree with you, but next week they won't, and there's nowhere for you to go. The Wisconsin Supreme Court is the final word when it comes to interpreting Wisconsin statutes or interpreting the Wisconsin Constitution. It won't work long term. Our justice system will be destroyed if judges don't set aside their own personal opinions and decide the case based on the law.
Well, we know you have personal opinions, as do the other candidates, around the issue of abortion. So how will you navigate that? Isn't there an expectation that you will oppose any effort to expand or protect a woman's right to choose?
The United States Supreme Court in the Dobbs decision that caught so much attention, their ruling did not end abortion. It did not authorize abortion. Instead, what the court recognized is that the question about abortion belongs in the hands of the voters, not in the hands of a judge anywhere. That is the correct answer. This decision needs to be made by the voters through referendum or through their elected legislative representatives, either way. But any judge on the court should be respecting the will of the voters when it comes to this and any other question.
So how will you navigate this issue if it does get in front of the court? Can you imagine a scenario where you will recuse yourself on a particular issue because of your prior history with the Republican Party or your involvement in other issues?
A judge must recuse on a case under the law if they or their family have a personal, financial, or other interest in the case. Either way, you have to recuse them. Otherwise, you should recuse when you cannot set aside your personal opinions and be objective in the case. It's too hypothetical to look into the future and say, well, this case, I would search my conscience and would be able to be impartial or not. I will certainly do that assessment in every case that comes in front of me if there's any kind of a concern.
Trying to find one of the issues here. We know that the state Democratic Party has given your opponent $1 million. Do you expect and would you accept money from the state Republican Party?
I'm not necessarily happy that this is what the world of politics has come to in Wisconsin, but I have to play by the rules as they exist. It's kind of the same argument as with early voting. Some people don't like it, but many of them have now been convinced that this is the law. That is what's permitted, and you should use what's available to you to help do the best you can in an election. So absolutely, I will do the same.
But does that concern you that people in your position who are running for these offices are now getting specific money from groups, either Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, because they are expecting that you will behave in a certain way? And these races, as you know, could top $50 million.
Yeah, I would expect that again, right? It never goes down. No one is buying anything from me except my adherence to the law and to the Constitution. No one is there is no money that's changing hands that says I'm going to vote one way or another in any particular case. You need to bring the facts, you need to bring the arguments effectively, and then I'm going to apply the law and the Constitution to those facts and those arguments. And that's it. There are no promises about how I'm going to rule on a case. And I hope that the voters of Wisconsin are going to be satisfied to return to a system where that's how it works.
Do you have any expectation what this race will cost? Do you think it will top 50 million?
I do, right? I mean, now, of course, all of that money, the 50 plus million spent in 2023, not all of that was spent by the campaigns.
Right. There's outside groups.
Yeah, outside groups put a lot of money into the race too on both sides. So I have no reason, well, there are some outside groups already putting money into the race, 7 figures. I don't expect that that's over, and I don't control their messaging. Neither does my opponent. We control the money that comes into our campaign. We control what messaging we do with that. I'm going to do my best with that.
Does it suggest to you, because I can't remember how much you spent as running for AG.
Not nearly this much.
Really?
Oh yeah, my campaign, and my opponent too for that matter, in 2018, we both had raised under $3 million.
Under 3.
And our campaign, that's what our campaigns had to work with. Neither of us then were taking any kind of direct transfers from a state party. At least I don't believe their side did, that we didn't. And the outside groups, did not spend nearly as much as outside groups spent in 2023.
So does that give you pause that the system for at least electing Supreme Court justice needs to be reformed?
It's got to go back to the legislature. Like I said, the rules are the rules for both sides, and I've got to play within those rules to the best advantage I can make for my campaign to get my message out.
Keeping an eye on time here, do you think redistricting is a pivotal issue in this election?
It kind of became that in the last week when my opponent ended up on a national donor fundraising call where the promise was that if she gets elected to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, they can take away 2 Republican congressional seats and turn those Democratic by redistricting. So even though I guess we kind of thought redistricting maybe was behind us, it appears to be an issue again.
Do you think in the state legislative maps it is behind us until 2030 when they can be redrawn again?
You know, the difference this time around is, the maps are usually contested, and they were previously here. This time around, what ultimately happened was the legislature approved maps proposed by the governor. They voted for them. The governor signed them. They're law now. I mean, it's going to be difficult to bring a case now to say somehow that process was improper.
Well, that's why I want to ask you about that, because you remember Justice Bradley, when the case was brought before her, said, look, everybody, quote, everybody knows that the reason we're here is because there was a change in the membership of the court. Should the court change if you are elected, how will you look at issues like, wait a minute, we've already done that, or it's been answered, and somebody else is looking for a different answer?
Our state needs stability. We can't have the rules of law in our state changing every time the majority on the court changes from conservative to liberal or the other way. We have to have that stability. So we should be very reluctant to throw away precedent that has come to be part of our law.
So is that an issue you would stand up against? Because there's the potential there that, things could come before you that someone will say, let's shop a new proposal in front of a conservative-leaning court.
Justice Hagedorn did that in a case where he had originally sided with the liberal justices when the case first came through, and then later on it came back in front of the court, and the majority had changed in the court. Now instead of 5-2 conservative, it was 4-3 conservative, and Justice Hagedorn changed his vote to stand with the precedent that had been decided just a few years earlier. That's a sensible decision for a justice to take when it comes to precedent, that we've come to rely on this, it's decided, let's move on to the next cases, because otherwise you just invite this endless litigation and you never resolve an issue.
What do you think this election comes down to for voters on April 1st?
Well, people still care about public safety, right? And I think on public safety, there's no comparison between our records. I spent 25 years as a frontline prosecutor, followed by 4 years as the state's attorney general. My opponent, she claims she's a prosecutor. She's never done that. She's never stood in a courtroom with crime victims. She's never worked with law enforcement from the crime scene to the courtroom to solve cases and bring justice for victims and for the community. I think I can greatly trump her on that question about public safety.
Does a Supreme Court justice really get to address public safety? Because it would be...
Sure. It's not all of your cases. It's not all of your cases, but there are plenty of cases the Supreme Court decides that deal with public safety. Absolutely. And we set the tone for things. But when with some of the cases my opponent has decided as a circuit court judge, she's shown herself very weak on understanding the danger that criminals pose to our community. I think once the public in Wisconsin hears about these things, they're not going to want to vote for that.
I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Charles.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.